Big news, Hawkeye Nation. Iowa's landed out of the transfer portal, Emely Rodriguez. And just when you thought Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese rivalry was over, it's heating back up today. Locked on Hawkeyes.
You are Locked on Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked on Hawkeyes podcast. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio here in the state of Iowa, including currently you can hear me on the Iowa Sports Radio Network. We have stations in Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, the Quad City, Sioux City, and our flagship 106.3 KXNO in Des Moines. You can hear me each weekday along with Ken Miller talking the world of sports from noon until 2. Today's episode of Locked on Hawkeyes is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, we got baseball to talk about as Iowa gets ready for their matchup in the Big Ten tournament. They know their pool, and we'll talk a little bit about the assignment and what's going to be in front of the Hawkeyes as they make their way over to Omaha, and some big accolades coming the way of the Hawkeye baseball program. Scott Dochterman's also going to stop in. We'll talk with Doc a little bit about the college football playoff, get his thoughts on some of the possible changes that we're going to see, some tweaks both for this year and the future, and we'll talk women's basketball with him, including Caitlin Clark against Angel Reese from over the weekend. Speaking of that, that's where we begin today's program with a look at the women's basketball program, and starting with the commitment of Emely Rodriguez. This was a get that I believe was a necessity for this program and a chance to get better in a lot of different areas. To me, this is the exact player that Iowa needed to solidify themselves at minimum as a top half Big Ten team next year, as a team that should be an NCAA tournament team, and a chance to build on that and be any more. You know, this program right now going through this transition, and now with the graduations we've seen in the last 2 years, the loss of Cynthia Fulter, such a big one this season, and a number of the other seniors, it's going to be a much different look. There'll be faces and names that you know, Taylor McCabe, Kylie Fierbach, but you look both of them, not even sure that either of them are going to be starters next year. We'll get into that momentarily. But let's start first with the commitment of Emely Rodriguez. So Rodriguez comes in after a year at Central Florida, at UCF, playing in the Big 12, obviously a very good women's basketball league, has had a ton of success, and even as that athletic conference as a whole has dissipated a little bit with the defections that they've had with Oklahoma and Texas. Still, really good women's basketball league. And to put up the numbers that she did as a freshman last year, it's really good. But she also fits in a style and in a way that Iowa needs. She can handle the ball. And as we saw last year, there were so many times, though it got better as the year went on, they just struggled in terms of ball handling. And when there was pressure out there, that was an issue. And you look at next year, and Chit Chat Wright's going to come in, and they're going to have an opportunity to have her at the point guard spot. But is she a full-time point guard? You know, for a good team, is she somebody that you can go out there and roll out there in her sophomore year, 32, 34 minutes a game? I'm not so sure. The questions about adding Neal at that position. And Rodriguez is another type of player with her size at 6 foot tall that can handle it. Another thing we have to look at is kind of where she fits and where she's going to go on this roster and what position she's going to be playing. Probably in that small forward role. I've seen her equated at times as kind of a guard / forward. Maybe we're splitting hairs here. We talk positionless basketball. A lot of people talk about that. Jan Jensen's talked about that, and having people that can do a lot of different things. You go from there. You're traditional. 1 is your point guard. 2 is your shooting guard. 3 is your small forward. 4 is your power forward. Then 5 is your center. You look at that direction, how Iowa's going to play. What we do know next year is they want to go back more traditional and have Hannah Stuelke play the 4. We saw Ava Hayden last year, just how good she was towards the end of the season and her growth. You couple her with the addition this year of Layla Hayes, who they think is going to be able to come in and probably even play more minutes than what we saw this past season out of Hayden. So you got those two at the center position, which means you'd anticipate not a whole lot of minutes at the 5 for Hannah Stuelke. Hannah Stuelke needs a healthy offseason. She didn't have that last year. An opportunity to develop the shot, develop the handles, do the things that are necessary. in terms of rebounding, in terms of playing in the post instead of even stepping out, knocking down shots and being able to spread the floor a little bit. I think all those things are there. It's just becoming more comfortable doing it. And she's going to have the kind of offseason now to make that all happen. Will Hannah Stuelke. So Rodriguez to me kind of fits in that small forward mix. And then you look around, where do you go? Is it chit chat right at the point guard spot? Do you go and hand the keys to Addie Deal? I don't think she's ready for that personally, not right away. But there are people that also think that I'm crazy when I say that. I think she is, though, a two guard right away, somebody that can help out and give you a good 25 minutes a game, and say 20 of them probably at the shooting guard position. I think that's what you're going to see out of her. And then you talk about, well, if that's the starting lineup, if it's chit chat, Addie Deal, Rodriguez, Stuelke, and Hayden, that means that Kyler Fearbach's coming off the bench. That means, and we saw her go back to that game against USC and just think of how much she improved on the defensive end of the floor. And it's not just strictly defense. It was seeing the growth that she made, because she was always a good defender, but then being able to bring it every single game, being able to bring it every single play. What she did in that game and how it continued through the course of the year certainly changed her trajectory. And we know she's not an elite offensive player, but she can be a fine offensive player. Knock down an open shot. She can get to the rim. She has athleticism to do that. Speaking of that, that's another thing that they needed, was the athleticism and the addition of Rodriguez. She brings that element to them. She's somebody on this roster that can get to the rim off the bounce. They just didn't have a ton of those type of players. Now, that's not the game of Taylor McCabe. That's not the game of Chit Chat Right at 5'4". She's quick, but then finishing around the rim. Rodriguez has that. An intriguing skill set that she has. Inside, outside, offense, defense, and she's just scratching the surface of what she is. This is a young woman that just started playing basketball at a competitive level when she was 12 years old. She has not been playing the game very long, and to be an all Big 12 freshman selection, to have the kind of programs that were after her, and for Iowa to land her, this was good. It's going to be a young team next year. They're going to look different. We'll dive deeper into that part of it, but this was an addition I absolutely believe that the Iowa women need, and I think that Jan Jensen knocked this one out of the park. It doesn't go as fast as we want sometimes. They're always searching for more, searching for information and hoping to get that kind of player, but that was definitely an eye-opener, getting Emely Rodriguez, and good work out of the staff of making that happen. We continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, your team every day, and we are going to talk with Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into Emely Rodriguez. We're also getting her thoughts over the weekend from Angel Reese against Caitlin Clark. That continues to dominate the conversation here on the Hawkeye front, and college football as a whole, as Doc is now covering college football over at The Athletic at a full-time role, along with doing what he does on the Iowa beat. We'll talk a little bit about the changes to the college football playoff, and maybe this is something that is good for the Iowa Hawkeyes. We'll do that as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. The NBA playoffs are in full swing every night, delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better way to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I love Anthony Edwards. I'm a Timberwolves fan, and I'm jumping aboard with my guy in these NBA playoffs. There are so many props up on FanDuel that you can find with Anthony Edwards and whoever your favorite player very well could be. Over under in points, rebounds. How about 25.5 in game one? How about 3-pointers made? 3.5 is the number in that one. Over, under, or just put them all together. Points, rebounds, and assists. That number for Anthony Edwards is 37.5. You put a bunch together, you can win big on FanDuel. New to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Scott Dochterman from The Athletic. He joins us. It's been a couple of weeks since we've spoken with Doc, so we're going to go back to shed some more light on that Iowa State story that he wrote. Just a phenomenal piece, Doc. I'm anxious to talk to you about that, but I want to start with the here and now news that Jan Jensen's program got, by all accounts, a pretty big commit here earlier this morning. Emely Rodriguez, with 3 years of eligibility, comes over to Iowa. Doc, for whatever reason, I thought maybe the honeymoon might wear off just a shade, that the numbers going to be tough to pack the building again this year as they did last year, 2 years removed from number 22. But it looks as though maybe that's not going to be the case whatsoever as this roster continues to take shape. And there certainly seems like the interest, at least at this point from where I sit, is not waning.
In Iowa women's basketball, I would say that, there seems to be still some major interest. And, they've got significant turnover. As we know, I think you lose, when you lose somebody to the WNBA and Lucy Olson and Sydney Falter and a few others, I think, you've got to expect there to be growing pains again. And yet, but I think by replenishing their roster the way they have and adding players at the same time, when you have Chit Chat Wright coming in from Georgia Tech at the point guard position, and then you add in Emely Rodriguez, who is a Big 12 on the all Big 12 freshman team, averaged about 12 points a game. I think you're looking at Iowa, maintaining its place as a probable NCAA tournament team. So I think they've done a nice job in the portal.
You, of course, don't cover women's basketball in the WNBA, but I know you keep a close eye on it, Doc, hearing you talk throughout the years. Were you watching Saturday and the blowback from Angel versus Caitlin once again? And boy, if there was an actual punch there, how ugly that would have been for the league.
Yeah, that was a tough moment. It just, to me, I think it just shows the anti Caitlin Clark, the hate almost. I think it's fair to say from Angel Reese, because if anybody else would have done that, she would have walked it off. It would have only been a comment foul, of course. It's only her reaction that influenced the flagrant. It was not a flagrant foul at all. Nope. I don't know what they're thinking or whatever. And then, I'm very interested in seeing what gets discussed or found out as far as what was yelled or allegedly yelled at the players from the Indiana fans, because we've heard this before. And if it happens, great. It needs to be said exactly what was said to those players. If it didn't, then there needs to be repercussions from that too, because I think a good fan base is getting blindsided with negative attention, and it needs to be proven that they said something. Absolutely.
Doc, I want to go back. It's been a couple of weeks since it was published at The Athletic, but your long form, and you're such a great long form writer, you really are. Your look inside Iowa State and where it was and what it's come through, what it's had to go through, and what lies ahead. Doc, again, I'm sure it was well received by Iowa State fans who just love the fact that when you guys do publish something over there. But this was a great read, and I thought that there was some stuff that maybe following it over the years you tend to forget that you brought back to light. Well done, Scott Dochterman. Good piece. Guessing it was well received.
Yeah, thanks so much. And it was something I worked on for a while, and I really appreciated all the time that people gave me. Brothers Matt and Bill was great because he spans the entire, 3 decades of kind of when I focused on this. And of course, Jamie Pollard was fantastic as always too. And I think what it speaks to Iowa State is that when you look back at the end of the Big 8 and beginning of the Big 12, there was a scary period for Iowa State because they were in, financial distress, and also were kind of given they were given a mandate that they had to boost spending to become Title IX compliant. So you had to remove a lot of money and spend a lot of money. And really there were some key people along the way, Dan McCarney being at the very forefront, but then also I think Jamie Pollard's the most instrumental athletic figure in Iowa State history, the way he's been able to build that. And then to look at it today And the challenges are still immense. The challenges are still there. They're going to have to deal with those on a consistent basis. But if nothing else, they're proving that they can compete in the Big 12, and they can fill that vacuum that's left behind by Oklahoma and Texas. But there are a ton of other schools that feel the same way. So it's going to be an ongoing process. But with the athletic department in place the way they have it, with the coaches that they have, Iowa State is going to be a very competitive program for years to come. And that's really just the way they grew it organically and put themselves in that position to where Iowa State today is just night and day from where it was in 1995.
Doc, when you look at the challenges going forward for Iowa State and most of the Big 12 programs that are there, you're not going to be able to financially compete with the SEC and the Big 10, but you still want to be able to compete, obviously, on the football field, but at other places as well. How do you do that, knowing that the money is going to be different for every Big 12 program out there?
I think it's not that dissimilar to how, maybe the financial second tier of the Big 10 hopes to compete with the upper tier.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a Wisconsin and Iowa, Michigan State, they've never been able to mount, whether it's history, tradition, resources, whatever, to compete on an even playing field with Ohio State and Michigan. It's just never happened. So what they do well. And I think that's the lesson that developmental programs, Iowa State being among them, and Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and some of the others can build on that. I mean, number one, you have an access point to get into the playoff. That is something that they need to have, and they do have. I think number two, what you look at is, can you compete for that point? And once you get into it, can you win games in the tournament? And I think that they're capable of doing that against comparable teams. It's just, can they win a national title? That's going to be awfully difficult, but it is for a lot of teams. So I think that financially, as long as they can compete in that arena for good talent and put themselves in that stage, they're fine. The problem Iowa State faces is that, where they are located, they've got 6 Big 10 schools either inside their border or on their border, plus an SEC team to the south. And they all have more resources than Iowa State because of their media rights contract. That's an uphill climb. But Iowa State has done such a remarkable job of engineering, again, an organic fan base that really came through and has come through for them. I would expect them to continue to compete, above their weight class and put up a good fight. And basketball is going to be an area where I think the Big 12 could still be a giant.
Doc, the college football playoff, is there a chance? I guess we'll put it that way, because it seemed like at the beginning of the year, there was no chance that there was going to be any tweaks to the seeding once the playoff rolls around here in January. Now, I thought, and apparently I read it wrong, that there is still an opportunity with another meeting still to come with the powers that be, that if they all get in a line and all vote the same way, that we could get change as early as this year, or is it as early as next year? Do you know?
For the seeding, it can happen this year, and there seems to be some momentum to that. But there won't be any changes as far as the number of participants in the field.
Right.
There is.
We're on 12. Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to be on 12 this year, but it could be to the seeding. So you're going to get the number 4 ranked teams as opposed to the 4 top champions. I think that's probably something that is going to happen. But then, in 26, that's where there's a lot of discussion. I expect 16 to probably end up being the number. There won't, and whether or not that means that there's going to be, the Big 10 and SEC will be guaranteed 4 teams, the Big 12 and the ACC 2, and then a G5 gets a team, and then the rest will be up to at large. I think that remains to be determined, the final numbers, but overall, this year, I think there's a strong possibility that it ends up being a seeded tournament.
So there's been so much talk about Big 10 if they do get those 4 teams. You get the conference championship game, the 3 seed against the 6, the 4 versus the 5. Winner of those 2 games obviously get a bid then into the college football playoff. My question for you, Doc, is outside of seeding purposes, what's the incentive in that Big 10 championship game? The number 1 and number 2 teams are already going to be in. Yes, there might be an easier path, but we don't know that until the bracket is set. What's going to be the incentive in a 16-team bracket for those conference championship games for the Big 10 and also the SEC?
when you look at it, on paper, I guess that's the way we're kind of observing this. It's that you want to, have a higher seed. If you're, let's say you're Penn State versus Ohio State, the winner could be the number 1 or number 2 overall seed, and you're playing the 16 or the 15. There's some significant incentive to have that versus being the 5 and playing the 12 or playing 6 playing the 11. But one thing that we always forget about is that they are competitors. Yeah. They do not want to lose. They do not want to lose to teams that they consider rivals or teams they may face later on. And when you get in that situation and you can hoist that trophy, that is a major motivator. So whether or not it matters, from a big picture standpoint, the way it once did, that remains to be determined. But I tell you what, when these athletes get on the field and they've been working and sweating and bleeding all these years, that competitiveness takes over in those games. So, and being able to be a Big Ten champion is still a big deal. So same thing with all the conferences. So that's my expectation of what will happen when these expansions take place.
Doc, as I told Trent earlier, started to dive into just a little bit to college football, just to kind of refresh memory, with all the sports that come and go. And it just started, I was looking at the Big Ten, and it dawned on me that, what the hell has happened to Wisconsin, right? This used to be a school that, they're a Penn, maybe they're a notch below probably Michigan or Ohio State, but, they're in the Penn State type of realm. What has happened to Wisconsin? Is this a blip?
What happens? Yeah, no, it's not a blip. And this is what you have to be careful of if you're a school in that second tier. Well, heck, even the first year. Look at how long it took Michigan, from when, before Jim Harbaugh took over after Lloyd Carr retired. It was an 8-year period where they were really a lost program. Penn State was lucky it had James Franklin and Bill O'Brien. Otherwise, it could have been in the same boat. But when you're a Wisconsin, you've got to maintain what you do well. You've got to keep your identity. And they took their eyes off the prize when they went to Luke Fickel, and Luke Fickel wanted to impose, he wanted to make an air raid attack on offense. Well, what you've got to be careful of is not straying too far from your identity, which at Wisconsin, they have big people. Big people blow people off the ball, and you run the football. The only thing missing in that, for that program back in, 16 to 19 era, something like that, was a quality quarterback. It was a winning quarterback. They had caretakers, and that was about it. But if they would have had a top, all Big Ten caliber quarterback, they would have been a playoff team and a 4-team era. So they strayed way too far from it. And it's not just offense. I mean, their offensive numbers were pathetic, but their defense is where they really have fallen off. And when one of the hallmarks of them was they were so gap sound, and they could throw so many different things at you as from a 3-4 perspective, where they were also looking more like a 4-2-5. Was that they always got to their gap. They were always athletic, and they stopped you every single time and put you in 3rd and long. And then they had guys like TJ Watt who could bust you off the edge. They have strayed in every facet. They are not technically sound. Their defense is a shell of itself. And offensively, I mean, they're in the hundreds in a lot of categories. If it wasn't for, in fact, they averaged 5 points worse per game than Iowa did last year. People don't think about that, but it's true. So they've got a lot of work to do. And I think they're going to try to get back to the basics of running the football and playing more physically. But I don't know, year 3, teams pass you by. And it's a lesson for Iowa, to me, that once Kirk does retire at some point, you stray too far, you could fall really quick. And it's hard to get up, especially in this good Big Ten that we've got seen.
That's Scott Dochterman from The Athletic, and a good thought about Iowa's program going forward, and something we've talked about a lot here on Locked On Hawkeyes. When that change happens, got to be ready, and you do not want to move away from what your DNA is, certainly as a football program. Iowa baseball, the success of the season was awarded. The awards are out for the Big Ten teams. We'll talk about that. What Iowa baseball has, seemingly, it's one and done. Iowa has to win their first game at the Big Ten tournament to be into the semifinals. We'll tell you all the details when we come back on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon back with you one final time. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Glad to have you aboard with us, and a shout out to you everydayers with us each and every day talking all things Hawkeye. So Iowa gets ready in the Big Ten tournament for their opener against Rutgers. It'll be on Wednesday evening as they'll take on the Scarlet Knights. Now, when you looked at the pools that came out, and that's right, no, this is not a traditional bracket. This is pool play, but a different kind of pool play, because if you win your pool, or if you're the top seed tie for your pool, you move on to the semifinals. However, because Rutgers upset Indiana in their first game in Omaha, that sets the stage for this. Iowa, Rutgers. Winner moves on in the Big Ten tournament to the semifinals, making the Iowa-Indiana game meaningless. On the other side, though, Iowa loses. They're still on the outside looking in because Rutgers would be 2-0. It comes down to this. A Wednesday game in the Big Ten tournament just to keep your season alive, even knowing you have one more game. How weird, how odd, but this is the structure of the Big Ten tournament. Now you have to be happy about the matchup that you have. And if you get that victory against Rutgers, what that can mean. Look, with Iowa's struggles down the stretch, they have put themselves in a spot where they have to win the Big Ten tournament to be an NCAA tournament team. I think even advancing with a perfect record to the championship game, I don't believe it would be enough. Sure, there are factors. I mean, every single bubble team loses here down the stretch in their conference tournaments. I guess you could come up with the case, but the reality of that is just so incredibly slim of that actually playing out. I think Iowa's got to win this thing in order to be a tournament team. And as we've seen, they got the horses to do it. At least get to that semifinal, and then anything can happen. But you beat Rutgers, then you have that meaningless game against Indiana. That means you can rest everybody. You don't have to use your pitching arm. And some of those other teams that are trying to make their way into the semifinals, they will be using their arms. What number of pitcher will they be using? Their number 3, maybe a number 4, whatever it is, and saving their number 2. What Iowa can do, it'll be Cade Obermueller that'll get the ball. And then where you go from there, I'm just so many different ways that this can play out. It's good in a way, but the pressure is on. Beat Rutgers, you solidify yourselves in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament, and then you're just 2 wins away from being an NCAA tournament team and winning that one. We mentioned some of the honors that are there for Iowa, as 8 players were honored by the Big Ten and the honorees, including mentioned Cade Obermueller, the preseason pick to win Big Ten Pitcher of the Year. Obermueller was outstanding once again this season. Took that final step that we were looking for from him. 107 strikeouts on the season, a 3.30 ERA for Cade Obermueller, and he is 4 strikeouts away from moving to second all-time in Iowa history. Aaron Savory, the number 2 this year, he was tremendous, a weekend starter for Iowa. ERA at 3.74 for him, more than a strikeout per inning out of him. Outstanding. How about Reese Moore? So this kid comes down to my neck of the woods out of Forest City and goes over to Van Meter. It was tremendous in the season there. Big numbers, 9 home runs this year, 16 doubles. He hits .319 on the season, 45 RBI. First team honoree for Reese Moore. On the second team, Reese Buter, who was a part of the rotation for most of the season until late in the year with that injury bug hit. Daniel Rogers, what they got out of him this season after coming in from Loris. I mean, how about that? And the transition up to the Big Ten, what he was able to do. Ben Wilmus, you hate to see the way that it came to an end with the injury at the end of the season. No surprise, Ben Wilmus. Watched a lot of him in high school and called a lot of his games. Outstanding. And then part of the old freshman team, Jackson Frost. I think that was a little bit of surprise, certainly for me, what he was able to do this early in his career, putting it together. And also Max Burt was named the Sportsmanship Award for the Hawkeyes for that front. So that's what you got. Iowa will be taking on Rutgers, 6 o'clock again, coming up on Wednesday evening, with a chance to move on to the semifinals with the victory. A loss, though they'll still have one more game, will mean they're on the outside looking in of the semifinals, and with it, they will not be an NCAA tournament team. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. We got a lot more basketball to get into. Again, still looking for more of your questions later this week. We'll have a mailbag edition. Hit me up on Twitter at Trent Condon. You can also find us at Locked On Iowa on X. You can jump over there. Or if you're watching on YouTube, just hit up that comment section and we will answer your questions a little bit later on in the week. Your team every day. Thanks for being with us here on the Hawkeye front. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Until then, go Hawks.